Hi, I'm Matt Culkin, co-chair of Steptoe's Financial Services practice, and welcome to Steptoe's Financial Services University. We're pleased to offer a series of short, focused conversations with my colleagues from our various practice groups and offices around the world. Today, I'm joined by my colleague and partner, Alan Cohn. We're going to talk about virtual currency and blockchain, and we've got no one better to talk to than Alan, who co-chairs our firm's blockchain and virtual currency practice. So Alan, first, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Matt.
And you're just down the street right now, but usually just down the hall from me. But you have a very interesting background, like a lot of lawyers in Washington with previous government service. Maybe just first, if you could, talk a little bit about your background.
Sure. After law school, I served in private practice for about 8 years, and then went to the Department of Homeland Security, where I had a variety of policy and strategy jobs for almost a decade, including overseeing at one point cyber crime policy for the Department of Homeland Security, where I was introduced to cryptocurrency, among a variety of other issues. I came to Steptoe in the spring of 2015, and have been working with you and others on a variety of different issues.
And I think it would also, right, we have a very unique group in the sense that it draws from a number of different disciplines. Maybe you can talk about the team that you've pulled together.
Sure. I mean, we're really proud of the blockchain and cryptocurrency practice here at Steptoe. It's a cross-cutting practice. I co-chair it with Jason Weinstein, who's a partner in our government investigations and enforcement group. And it really reflects, Matt, as you've said, kind of a key strength of the firm, which is that across each of the different regulatory disciplines in blockchain and cryptocurrency, as well as a number of the functional areas, and anti-money laundering and commodities regulation, securities tax, government enforcement. Our attorneys understand the regulatory background, but also have served in many of the government agencies that actually regulate this space, from the Department of Justice and Treasury to the SEC and the CFTC. It brings to our practice an understanding of how the agencies think, how they're thinking about these issues, and how to really engage with these agencies in a meaningful way to kind of cut through the thicket of regulatory requirements, effectively address enforcement issues, and solve problems on behalf of clients.
Thanks for that. That's a great way to describe the work that we do together. I'm wondering, as I think about the landscape, and particularly the legal landscape here, and I kind of break things into sort of the government regulated industries, certainly legislative initiatives, sort of one piece. The second is, how companies are actually structuring and operating domestically, internationally, cross-border. And then third, I think about some of the risks, particularly from an enforcement, investigation, litigation perspective. So maybe we'll kind of break our conversation into those buckets. And so I'll flip it to you if you want to just sort of share how you think about Washington generally, but certainly there are some aggressive states in this space, licensure, regulation, creating or repurposing the infrastructure they have. There are a number of initiatives on Capitol Hill right now. Policymakers are very interested in this space. And I know you do a lot of work educating policymakers. So with that, maybe I'll let you just sort of start and share your impressions.
Sure. Well, I think there's two misnomers about the cryptocurrency, crypto asset space. Number one is the idea that it's unregulated, or number two, the idea that there's a whole muddle of regulations and nothing's particularly clear in terms of how it applies to this asset class. And both of those are not exactly correct. There's, as you said, at the federal level, we think about a couple of major buckets of regulatory concern. There's the whole area of anti-money laundering, counterterrorism financing, and economic sanctions, largely overseen by the Treasury Department, where regulations are actually relatively clear. The Treasury Department's done a good job of issuing guidance. That guidance has been cumulative over time, and in the last year or so, the department has aggregated all of that guidance, tried to fill in gaps to give companies operating in this space a pretty good picture of their obligations under existing laws and regulations in this space. There's also, second, there's commodities regulation, which of course, Matt, you're deeply and intimately familiar with and do a lot of work in this space. We do a lot of work together in this space around commodities regulation. And the CFTC, the regulator in the space, has been doing an increasingly good job of clarifying requirements and helping the industry understand how this particular asset class fits into the regulatory regime under the Commodity Enforcement Act and other relevant legislative and regulatory requirements. Then we get to securities regulation, where things are a little less clear. And it's been in this space where it's been a struggle for all firms and all companies to really understand what the regulatory environment looks like, what the rules are, and how best to navigate a project to a conclusion that the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to be comfortable with. Another bucket is tax, which is often forgotten. The Internal Revenue Service, both its civil side as well as its criminal investigations division, both are very familiar with cryptocurrency and crypto assets. There was guidance issued early on in the kind of the commercial lifespan of cryptocurrency, and that there's been guidance added on time as well as enforcement actions in that space. And we're beginning to see much more, and we're now beginning to see more regulation in the banking and financial institution space by entities like the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and others. And then, of course, states run the range from having no real regulation in this space, not even a requirement for under money transmitter laws, all the way up to the state of New York with its crypto asset specific bit license requirements. So, I think you have a pretty rich regulatory environment. The challenges are less that there's a lack of regulation, but more kind of how does it all tie together. Legislatively, as you said, there is a lot of interest on the Hill, but so far there hasn't really been a legislative package that's made its way all the way through Congress and either clarified definitions or jurisdiction or other kind of outstanding issues in a meaningful way. And that may continue just because it's a hard area to understand generally. The technology is very new, and it's difficult to understand what is the best way for legislators to approach this space other than to make sure that regulatory agencies are focused on it, they're studying the technology, they're talking to each other, they're reporting back to Congress about how best to understand the space.
Yeah, what's really interesting about what you just said is that, particularly on the federal side, there's a strong public policy interest in protecting customers or protecting counterparties. And that's true whether it's a banking regulator, a securities regulator, or a commodities regulator. And I know from my experience that trying to apply a law that was written 30 or 40 years ago and was intended to cover, for example, soybean futures contracts that farmers were using to hedge their crop, and now applying those same words in the context of Bitcoin or Ether or something else, right? It creates some interesting outgrowths, and particularly for career government lawyers who have always looked at something through a certain lens, it's required some creativity and it's required some education to allow new entrants into this marketplace.
I think that's right. And I think depending on what's being done or what's trying to be done with cryptocurrency or crypto assets, the language fits better or less well. I would imagine, but you're the better judge of it, that a derivative contract on a cryptocurrency is a little bit easier to fit into a derivatives framework than whether a particular crypto asset is a security. Another thing that I think is challenging is that, especially when you think about this, for example, the securities regime, you think about the kind of two goals, right? Market integrity and investor protection, right? So you have the market, and then you have a class. You have a proponent of a particular type of thing or asset, and you have an investor. Well, in this space, you can have more actors than that, and we don't have a good way of grasping that. So, for example, a crypto asset project where a new crypto asset's being created, and then it's being for some purpose, and then it's being made available for purchase. You can have investors in the project, right, who fund the development of the project and may or may not have particular rights in the project. But you also may have users of the project, purchasers of the asset who purchase it for consumptive purposes or for other use-related purposes, who are not investors, but who resemble more the class of individuals that, you know, a Federal Trade Commission or a commodity or a Consumer Financial Protection Board type regulator. That's really who would look after that class of people's interests. And so I think these different scenarios require parsing. You know, these rules can be more clearly applied to this asset class. These rules are going to take it's going to take either a lot more work, or we may need a new set of rules.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm going to flip a little because I know you also advise companies in this space from a more traditional corporate business perspective. I'm wondering what you can share in terms of, I know from your experience, for example, that the issues that a lot of these companies face, they're not unique to this industry. It's actually a lot of the same issues that other startups or other financial services companies face. So if you can maybe shed some light on the work you do there.
Sure, and it's really, I think, a testament to the strength of the practice as well. I think it's probably fair to say that, Matt, both your and my expertise sits more in the regulatory space, but we have really excellent practitioners in the firm who focus on corporate structuring, intercompany relationships, terms of use, cross-border issues, including tax structuring issues, who do a substantial amount of work in the cryptocurrency, crypto asset, blockchain space. And as you said, in many ways that resembles any other type of corporate structuring and cross-border financial structuring and other types of structuring. And in some ways, it's very different, especially given the particularly distinct regulatory regimes that are emerging in different parts of the world. So the intersection of the regulatory regimes with the corporate activities is a very interesting development. So, for example, Europe now is looking at regulating the crypto asset space in a very different way than the US does. Countries like Singapore and Switzerland and others are creating specific regimes for how crypto assets should be regulated. So what does that mean? What that means is that companies are seeing the benefit or importance of having corporate structures that enable them to operate differently in different countries, structuring with affiliates or with partners or licensing their technologies doing things that traditional businesses would do in the way that traditional businesses would do them, from a corporate or a tax perspective, and then ensuring that that the structure meets the regulatory requirements of the jurisdictions that that it arrives in. It's a very it's an interesting piece, and it's one where the United States runs the risk of falling a bit behind and chasing innovation offshore. Obviously, there's a countervailing interest in ensuring, again, market integrity and protection of investors and users. But there is we see a real determination in other jurisdictions to not fall behind American innovation in this space. And so being able to operate in different jurisdictions and to be able to understand how to structure from a corporate and a tax perspective across borders can be a really important piece of effectively doing business in this space.
Yeah, and to build on what you said at the beginning, sort of clarifying some misconceptions, as these companies have grown, they become far more sophisticated in terms of their legal structure and their legal operations, but also in their commitment to good corporate governance and documentation and sort of a logical decision-making process. And so I've been struck by the work we've done helping to ensure boards of directors have independent seats filled by qualified candidates, making sure that the legal office, the legal department, which is generally quite sophisticated, is thinking about things correctly, that they're advising executives thoroughly, they're documenting the decisions. I've been quite struck in a positive way at how they seem to operate a lot like our traditional clients.
Well, it's interesting. The industry is really on a maturity curve that resembles that of internet technology and other types of emerging technology. And it's very good for the industry. And as you noted, it brings the industry into contact and requires the industry to do things that look a lot like what traditional institutions do, and to structure their operations in the manner in which traditional entities do. You have companies that are now worth, large amounts of money, doing a lot of business, that have to grow from very small, closely held, founder teams up to, as you said, commercially structured entities with sophisticated boards and officers, with robust legal departments and compliance departments, and with well-functioning corporate governance processes. But I think that that's good for the industry, and it's also hopefully reassuring to companies in other industries that are wondering whether it's safe or it's possible or or otherwise to kind of engage with this industry in a meaningful way.
Well, so I do want to spend a minute just to reflect on and get your thoughts on some of the risks that are out there. You and I both get the same press releases from the same regulatory agencies, but it's not uncommon to see a crackdown on an ICO, to see a regulator bringing an enforcement case. It's an important part of this industry. It's certainly a strength of our practice, but I think in order for this to be a complete conversation, we need to talk for at least a minute or two about this.
No, absolutely. Look, enforcement risk, litigation risk is a very big part of operating in this space. Regulators, including the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network within the Department of the Treasury, the U.S. Attorney's offices enforcing the Bank Secrecy Act or sanctions requirements or others have been active in bringing cases. Regulators like the SEC and the CFTC have brought numerous civil enforcement actions, and a much greater number have opened a much greater number of investigations of companies operating in this space. The IRS has criminal investigations, has been conducting criminal investigations in this space for a long time, has brought civil actions against cryptocurrency exchanges in order to get records, in order to more fully enforce tax requirements. State attorney general's offices and financial regulators are, have continuous kind of investigation efforts in this space. So any company that operates in this space does need to expect that at a minimum, they'll get a request for information from at least one, most likely more regulators. They'll likely, anyone exchanging cryptocurrency or crypto assets, or acting as an administrator of cryptocurrency or crypto assets, who registers with FinCEN will be audited. Their compliance programs will be audited, and it is not enough simply not to be located in the United States. If you do business with U.S. persons, U.S. entities, or customers, you may be subject to U.S. laws covering the range of issues, even though you have no operations in the United States. You have no personnel in the United States. And so being aware of the kind of the long arm of U.S. enforcement is an important part of operating in this space. It's an important part of sophisticated legal operations and compliance operations, and always making sure you understand the U.S. presence on your platforms, U.S. regulatory obligations, and what they really mean, how you meet them, and then making sure that you're prepared for questions that you'll be asked by regulators is extremely important. And of course, we have a lot of experience defending companies that find themselves on the wrong end of an enforcement action, either at the federal or the state level, civil or criminal. And that type of activity can be difficult, obviously. It can be very frustrating. But again, success in those types of actions depends on building a strong foundation in the regulatory and the structuring area, and understanding that you will likely face scrutiny by regulators at some point in your operation.
Thanks for that. And I particularly like how you brought it back to where it began. So thank you for making our tour a full circle. And so, Alan, before we go, I want to give you the chance to just share the most important takeaway of this entire conversation.
Look, I think for companies that operate in this space, or even the companies that think that their operations may someday touch this space, it's important to remember this is not an unregulated area. The regulations are not all unclear, so there's nothing to be done. It's a complex regulatory environment, but it's not unknowable, and that we can help you navigate this space in an effective way, understand it for operations you may be undertaking now, understand it, and also understand it so that you can think about engaging with cryptocurrency, crypto assets, blockchain technology in the future.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt.
So that does it for another episode of Steptoe's Financial Services University. Today we dove into the world of cryptocurrencies. You can watch more episodes and learn more about our financial services practice at steptoe.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.